Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new show here on the Ask Ally podcast and Facebook Live broadcast. Really delighted to see so many of you here. We are having slightly shaky internet tonight. One of us is in Ireland, me, and one of us in Mexico,
me.
So let me introduce you, for those of you who may not already know. On my right, but probably possibly your left, is Boni Wagner-Stafford, who is Ally's communications manager, has been for the last some time. And Boni has worked in broadcasting in a past life. And beside her, in the middle, or as I see it, but I'm not quite sure what you're seeing, is Mr. Adam Croft, who probably needs no introduction. And I'm Orna Ross, Director of Allies, and we are all authors, and we all write fiction and non-fiction, and we are having this new take in this new kind of show because we were thinking and talking about the fact that if you write fiction, you tend to talk about books and mean novels, and if you write non-fiction, you tend to talk about books and mean non-fiction of whichever type you write, memoir or how-to or whatever. But self-publishing advice actually needs to be tailored in a slightly different way across lots of different issues for fiction and non-fiction. So we thought it would be a really interesting show each week if we were to come together, take a theme, and then apply a fiction lens on the one hand and a non-fiction lens on the other. So I'm going to ask Boni and Adam now to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the books that they're writing, and then we'll get to our theme of today. So ladies first.
Okay, Boni. Ladies first. Hi. So I, as Orna mentioned, have a background in journalism and broadcasting, and I've written a couple of nonfiction books, one of them co-authored, and I've been in an anthology about cats. My cat is outside, so as not to make too much noise today, another one recently about how to develop book marketing strategies for your nonfiction books. I work with authors in the nonfiction genre, whether it's memoir or how-to fiction, or sometimes journalistic nonfiction. And I have a fiction in progress, and I have to say, I just find fiction way harder than nonfiction. Hats down, bow down to you guys who knock fiction out of the park. I'm having a very hard time with it.
Okay, well, we'll see. Does that change over the coming weeks and months?
Right.
Yeah. Adam, I'll let you introduce yourself now to everyone.
Well, I've kind of gone the other way. No,
yes.
I've kind of gone the other way. I started as a fiction writer for many, many years and bowed to the pressure of people wanting some non-fiction things from me and some kind of guidance due to, I guess, the kind of 10 years that I've been indie publishing. So I started, I think it's probably only about a year ago, my first non-fiction book came out, and I've got 3 now. I would agree with Boni, actually, that I find writing non-fiction much easier. It requires far less of a thought process because I'm talking like I'm talking now, just through my fingers. Whereas, I don't have to worry about inventing characters and making things sound dramatic and what have you. It's just me passing on knowledge as I do through these sorts of things anyway. So I tend to find nonfiction a hell of a lot easier and actually quite addictive for that reason, because I can knock a book out, a nonfiction one, fairly quickly compared to a fiction one. I don't tend to write myself into those holes.
Yeah, and I too write both, though I completely think of myself as a novelist and a poet. I do actually probably write more nonfiction, which is kind of weird, but that's the way it is. I also find nonfiction less challenging at one level, in the sense that it is, I think you get to know what you want to write about and the effect that you want the book to have for the reader more easily. Sometimes novels, you don't know what on earth you're doing until you're almost finished, or even maybe completely finished the first draft. And my novels take a long time because they're quite heavy, historically researched, and all of that kind of thing, and writing and rewriting. And the same with poetry rewriting, which is for a different show, I know. So we will hope to kind of bring a different take on the different topics that we're going to be talking about from those two perspectives. We would like you to talk too about how you experience it, because it's always different for all indies. And we would like also for you to send in your questions and things. If you just put them into the comment box there on Facebook. We are using a BeLive platform, so we can bring all three of us to you together, which Facebook doesn't allow. And there's a slight delay on the commentary, but if you put your comment in the box, we will deal with it before the end of the show. So our theme today is, we're talking about branding, and we're talking specifically about a question: do you brand your book? And perhaps have different pen names for your different types of books that you write, particularly if you write fiction and non-fiction, but perhaps also if you write different fiction series or different standalones. Or do you brand the author, where the author name is the thing that carries the readers along, and the different reasons as to why you might do one or the other looked at through the lens of fiction and non-fiction. So when we were doing our kind of pre-show prep, Adam said something interesting, which was that when he started, didn't really think very much about branding, and certainly if he was starting now, would be thinking an awful lot more about it. So I'm going to begin there with that topic. Can you kind of tell people what you meant by that, Adam, and also a little bit about your branding strategy around fiction and non-fiction?
I think what I meant by it is that, as with most things, I got it wrong for a long, long time and accidentally stumbled across the right way of doing things, and now try to make myself sound impressive by trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I think that was the point I was trying to get across. I think for me, there are two very different ways of branding as a fiction writer and a non-fiction writer. I think as a fiction writer, I brand myself as, personally, as an author, perhaps as an entertainer, storyteller, the new must-read author, these kinds of things. You get to be a bit more you, I think, if you're marketing yourself as a fiction writer. But I think mostly the branding focuses on the characters, the worlds, the series, so that perhaps it isn't so much personal branding involved. You're looking to immerse readers in a world that you've created. Whereas with the non-fiction, you position yourself, or I do anyway, because I'm big-headed, as a guru, expert, someone with the knowledge that can solve a reader's problem or provide some kind of solution, change their life in some way. For example, my Indie Author Mindset books position me in terms of, having sold 2 million books, featured on BBC and newspapers and all of this stuff, which will ideally make my target audience, which is other indie authors, sit up and think, well, wow, this guy must know what he's talking about. So it's, I suppose you're branding the knowledge you have and the position you have with non-fiction, and with fiction you are selling the world and the characters and the dream that you've created.
Okay, and we come back to in a little while to the way you've managed having these two very different types of books in your repertoire or your oeuvre. Bonnie, what about you and branding? You've been thinking about using a different name altogether. Talk to us about why and what that's about. And is it a branding thing? Is it a personal thing?
Yeah, great question. And then I want to come back and talk about what we're talking about with branding. But it is kind of how I got into this thinking about branding. I have kind of a storied background. I've been married a few times. I've had 4 different names. When I was a journalist in a very public profile, working for CBC, etc. in Western Canada, I was Bonnie Fox. And now I'm Boni Wagner-Stafford. it's a long story. I've written a piece in the Globe and Mail that kind of goes into it. But so the books that I've published have been under Boni Wagner-Stafford, and that's a very long name. It takes up a lot of real estate on the bottom of the book, and it's kind of cumbersome. And so I've been finding myself waking up in the middle of the night going, should I just go back to Bonnie Fox? Very short, concise, kind of has a little cachet. I have some kind of audience, if any of them are still alive, because it was a long time ago, but from my broadcasting days. So for nonfiction in particular, I've been wondering whether that makes any sense. So I don't know. I haven't decided what to do about that, but it's kind of fun to talk about.
And back to the question around what we were talking about when we're talking about branding.
The branding, yeah. So branding, as soon as you start to say branding, it can have kind of a, woo-woo connotation. Oh God, you're not going to go down that road. But really branding there's a great quote from Jeff Bezos. He says, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. So it's everything you say, everything you do. It's the colors you wear. It's how you dress. It's how you write. It's your author platform. It's the ways you design your covers. So it's all of those things all encompassed. And I was going to say to Adam that for nonfiction, yes, you want to be able to brand yourself as an expert. Otherwise, why would people bother reading your book? But I think the main thing is to be you. And so the brand must be authentic or it's never going to stick. And so it's to find those elements within that brand that are authentic and allow you to be, in the case of nonfiction, an expert or an authority. And in the case of fiction, I wanted to pick up on something else you said, Adam, which was you're really branding your worlds. When I read fiction, and I read a fair bit of fiction, I go for the author. And once I know what that author writes, I will read more of that author. And we know that. That's the whole business of building your list and getting your name out there. But so I'm interested in what you think about that. Once I know an author, I will go after that author. And so it is the author brand, not necessarily the world's.
I think it's an interesting sign. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. Great question. We're all jumping in.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I think it's an interesting sign that different readers do approach things in different ways. There's no, all readers are looking for this, and this will impress all potential readers. I think it's just a case of kind of highlighting those differences between the two. I mean, of course, if you're positioning yourself as an expert, as a non-fiction author, those things all have to be true. You can't, go making things up, positioning yourself as an expert if you're not. And there's also a large element of trust, which I think is where the personal story comes in, and letting people know how you got to that point. I think that then builds up that personal character and that trust, which will help on the non-fiction front.
I think also, in answer to that very interesting question of whether it's the author or the world or the characters or, I think it depends very much on the genre. So I think, for example, literary fiction readers, once they like an author, they will read lots of standalone books that author has written. But in, say, fantasy or lots of crime, people want the character, in say detective novels, they want the main character again and again and again. In something else, it might be in fantasy, it could be the world that they're after. And so we're seeing this thing that's happening in the indie space where authors are actually using different names for different series because they don't want to mess up the Amazon also bots. They want to appear, and particularly those writers who are in KU or Amazon exclusive, but not only them. They want, when they turn up in Autobots, that they are the same type of book, and because the algorithm gets very messed up if you write it like I do, for example, across 4 different types of books. Adam, you have a kind of cunning strategy around all that too, because you didn't want your, say, indie author mindset book turning up in somebody's but you didn't want the wrong authors turning up in your also books for your fiction. Say you didn't want, Joanna Penn or David Cochran or whoever turning up in your mystery also books. So talk to us about that, how you managed that, because I think it was pretty clever, actually.
Yeah, well, I think whether you have a different name or not depends on how connected the two things are. And I write police procedurals, I write traditional murder mysteries, and I write psychological thrillers. They're all kind of under the crime banner, so I consider them to be close enough to all be written under Adam Croft. My nonfiction is also written under Adam Croft, but the author field on Amazon and on the other vendors is Adam L. Croft, which is near enough that everyone's going to know it's me, because hopefully my name is enough to sell some nonfiction books on indie writing, indie publishing. But it's also different enough that Amazon treats it as a different author for the purposes of categorization. I mean, it knows it's me. It's all under the same KDP dashboard. It's not hiding anything. The cover still says Adam Croft on it. But it's just a case of, as you say, not polluting those also boughts, which would actually make life far more difficult for me, because then my psychological thrillers, my crime books, as you say, would have Joe Penn, David Cochran, Brian Meeks popping up in there, which would then perhaps confuse readers or have people clicking through who aren't in my intended target audience, which will then lower the percentage of people buying the books, which could then lower my visibility on Amazon. It takes into account a lot of this is possibly how the algorithm works. But for me, it's not worth taking the risk. So yeah, it's a small but subtle change, just having my middle initial in there.
Yeah, and we've got lots of members now. It's not something we were ever asked for before, but say in the last 2 years, we've got lots of members who are saying, I want more, room for more pen names in my ally profile. I write this under that name, I write that, and the names are completely different, and they're writing in completely different genre, and for that reason they are. And as you say, this is almost like a supposition that this is how the algorithm works. People think it is, but we can't be sure because Amazon never tells you anything about stuff like that. And so I think it's an interesting sort of indication of how seriously people take that whole process on that wish, that possibility on Amazon that can deliver that you won't be able to rustle up all by yourself. What about you, Boni? Will you use a different name for your fiction when that novel is done, which it will be done?
It will be done. Oh my God, it will be done. It's only been going for 7 years already, and I've got a couple more left for sure. Partly because it's set in Russia. So I must get there before I have it in my head that I must get there before I finish it. The thing about my fiction piece is actually it's based on the true story of my grandfather and his escape from Russia immediately after or shortly after the Russian Revolution. And so my grandfather's last name is Wagner. So I feel a strong desire to have the Wagner name involved in that one. So maybe it's that my fiction ends up being Boni Wagner or Boni Wagner-Stafford, and my nonfiction ends up being Bonnie Fox, which follows the journalistic piece. I don't know, but I guess I should decide soon.
Yeah, I think you just decided. What do you think, Adam? I reckon she just decided.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that way round. Up until then, I'd kind of been thinking as well that Bonnie Fox as a standalone name does sound a bit more fiction to me, and Boni Wagner-Stafford has that kind of that double-barreled impact of non-fiction and authority about it. So I think on first appraisals, that's kind of where I would go with it. But yeah, you did throw a spanner in the works with the Russian link and being connected with the journalism, and that makes a hell of a lot of sense too. So I can totally see why you're in a bit of a quandary there.
Yeah, it's tough.
if it is a novel that's on the literary end of things, I think Bonnie Fox sounds more like a commercial fiction writer. For my money, Boni Wagner sounds more like a literary. And I think, it's just great talking about what you're going to do, just as an example for those who are listening, and just to bring up some of the issues around it that you kind of have to think about. So in terms of what do you think is the most important, if you were to just give indie authors the biggest, bestest tip around branding, what would that be?
Me first?
All right, then.
I would say we spend a lot of time talking about identifying your reader. So identify your reader so that you know who you're writing to. Identify your reader so you know who you're marketing to. I would say that my biggest tip for this would be to turn it around. And this aligns with something we used to do in journalism as well, was we would say, if you're covering, let's say, a fire, you're covering a fire and you go and you're looking at the fire and you're saying, oh my goodness, it's, the building is on fire. But the story happens when you turn around and you look at the people who are watching the fire. That's where the story is. The story isn't in the flames. So with branding your books, we want to identify who the reader is, but turn it around. How are the readers going to find you? How are they going to identify with you? And that's the beginnings of building your author brand. That would be what I would say.
Fantastic. Adam?
I would say for fiction, I would say be authentic. I think readers want to connect with you personally. They want to see your personality shine through. And things like Facebook Live videos, especially if they're shot, with your front-facing camera on your phone, not edited, no special lighting effects, things like that. I think if you're personal and personable, I think that helps quite a lot. I think for nonfiction, I would say my biggest tip is probably to be prepared to give. I think don't lock all of your secrets and knowledge behind the paywall, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And be prepared to blow your own trumpet. What makes you an expert? Why should people listen to you? Why should they trust you?
Fantastic. My favorite definition of branding is that it's your promise to the reader. And
yeah, that's a good one.
And I think that then that allows me and writers like me who write for very different audiences across these different genres to think about branding. In fact, for a long time I resisted the whole word branding, and I really only use it because it's the word that we all understand what we mean. But I think a lot of authors are a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of branding. It can feel false. It can feel, we mentioned the word authenticity earlier, and I think that's so important. And what Adam is saying about just being yourself, putting yourself out there, and it feels really uncomfortable, but actually that's where the connection happens in terms of the author branding. Then if you've got very different kinds of books, and if you've got, say, let's talk about having a nonfiction line and a fiction line, the promise I'm making to the reader, if I'm writing, say, an author guide, is a completely different promise that I'm making to the reader if I'm writing a poem, or I'm writing a historical fiction or family murder mystery. They are completely different promises. And again, if you write just standalone books, because not everybody writes series, it's the same thing. Each book may be making a different promise to the reader, but you then, as an author, have to find what is the one thing that connects all of these, that also, as Boni said, turn it around then, that also connects to these particular people that you're trying to reach. And it can be quite complex. I mean, the best thing I could say about branding is probably something you're either going to be able to do and you're doing it already, and I don't need to say it, or else you're not able to do it, and so it's useful advice. But actually the best thing you can do is just write one thing and write it over and over and over and over. But few of us can do that, or else be very, very clear and make those big walls between the different types of books that you do. Because the way I do it under one author name, and I continue now because I kind of started, so I'll finish. But if I was back at the beginning, knowing what I know now, for my own sanity even, I think it would have been more helpful to have been far more clear and to go so far as to have a different author name and persona and thing, because we're all many selves. You know, we can actually express different aspects of our personality and different aspects of ourselves in our different lines. So if I was starting out, I would do that. But obviously, it all takes quite a bit of time. So you've got to be thinking through. And also, I think we fall upon, as Adam was saying, we fall upon this as we do it. We learn it by doing.
The one thing we haven't I know we have just a few minutes left here, but the one thing we haven't talked about is when there's a different reason for using a pen name that isn't necessarily associated to branding. And I see a question from Caitlin, but I'm working with a couple of authors who are co-writing a memoir. It's on a very sensitive topic and involves the stories of their family members. And so one of the women is choosing to use a pen name because the family member is asking her to. The other author is not using a pen name because her family member is fine with all those details coming out. So, there's that reason as well for choosing a pen name, because you're trying to keep something private or respect the wishes of somebody whose story is intersecting with your own. But that brings its own challenges then to branding and to marketing. And so if you're using a pen name, do you do a Facebook Live? Are you concerned with showing your face? Is it okay to show your face? And I think in some cases it is fine, because you're not trying to put something across on people. You're just using a pen name. It's not that you're trying to hide who you are. But in some cases you may need to hide who you are. So I think it depends. What do you guys think?
I just asked, could I put Caitlin's question to you actually directly, because it's tied to what Boni was saying there, but she and we don't have a lot of time left, so it'd be great to get her an answer. What if you're using a pen name? Is it okay to still do Facebook Live in those cases? Caitlin worries. I presume, by the way, you are pronouncing your name Caitlin. It might be Kathleen, because that is actually the original Irish pronunciation. I'm not sure. But anyway, I worry because I'm writing for a US audience, but I am South African. Adam has just kind of ducked out. What do you think? Technology has let us down there again, I think, because he was all set to answer the question. But specifically, Boni, do you have an opinion on, is it okay to do a Facebook Live if you use a pen name? Are you confusing your audience?
I think it is, and again, it depends on the circumstances. It depends on what the topic is. It depends on the reason for doing the pen name. But if you're, can be upfront and open about it, I don't think that there is really any issue. And I guess it's difficult to lump everybody in with the same brush. And Adam is back now. Maybe he can jump in with a thought.
Yeah. Do you think it's okay, Adam? I'm not sure if you heard, to use a pen name. If you're using a pen name, okay to do Facebook Live? Are you confusing people?
I think, to answer Caitlin's question, I think that's fine. I think if you're in a position where you can be open and honest that you are the same person, that's fine. Obviously, as Boni was saying, there are situations where you perhaps won't want to. And as for being South African but writing US-based fiction, all I would say is it didn't do Lee Child any harm.
Right.
On that line, I like to end on a good line, and I like that line very much. Yeah. So I definitely, with global indie, we're all writing. We all are writing in one place and have readers in other places. That's really, really common, and in fact, people love that. So I feel myself that readers, once you clearly explain what's going on, readers accept all sorts of things from authors, and particularly also books they've already read and enjoyed. So if you've got a good reason for it, it can actually be part of what makes you interesting. And the more you can be yourself and, and have something going on, whatever it might be, rather than just, business as usual, the more people tend to develop that kind of heart and soul connection, which is what they are looking for when they turn to you and your books. Our time absolutely flies, I have to say, 30 minutes, and there are three of us. And so I feel like we've kind of, got in there a little bit on this topic of branding, it's probably something we're going to return to because it is it's super important. We probably take another aspect of branding in a future show and dive down into it. After this, we'll be deciding what we're going to bring you next month. We're not quite sure yet, but just before you leave, we're ending each podcast now, each broadcast now, with an invitation for you to take one aspect of something that we discussed tonight. Something, it might be around the pen name thing specifically, or it might be some other aspect of branding, and just go away and do a bit of free writing around the topic and come up with something that moves your own relationship with your brand along a little bit along the line. So my thanks to Boni and to Adam, and we will be back. Our gig here is on the second Monday on Facebook Live, every second Monday of the month. So if you're interested in writing fiction and or non-fiction, that's what we'll be talking about on the second Monday of the month. And the podcast, if you want to hear it with the transcript and so on, will be on the blog on Wednesday next. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and until we see you again, happy writing, happy publishing. Bye. Bye. Bye.